Hello everyone. It's been a really long time since I was able to conduct a class with you, and the last two poems that were assigned to me as a revision of the syllabus that was still to be addressed. I was supposed to be doing The Farmer's Bride with you, and the second poem was by Riley, Death Makes Dead Metaphor Revive. I'm still waiting for you to hear out the audios of the previous poem, which I'm sure you haven't, or if you have not done carefully enough. Anyway, let's get down to what we are trying to do today. I'm here to address Riley's Death Makes Dead Metaphor Revive. Now, you have to understand the background behind it. It is not very usual for people to be writing in a sort of a continuum the way Riley does. What she does is that her previous works, especially an essay which is titled Time Lived Without Its Flaw. Now these things I will be sending you links, and I am also typing sort of an answer or a note or an annotation, whatever you want to call it, for the poem. It's a rich, complex poem, and it definitely has not only a background but also a tradition in Riley's own writings. Now the whole idea is that she concludes two or three of her very important works in this particular poem. Sadly, the background is not a very happy one, and this poem is also one of the many that she has written. In fact, an entire collection for which she was honored throughout the literary circles of Europe. Was born, this entire collection was born out of her experience of losing her elder son. So it is indeed very sad, but people who have read these books, critics, readers, literary, people who have read Riley, or who have actually been through the same experiences, same unfortunate experiences she has been, have all appreciated her poetry as being absolutely to the point. And not only to the point, it somehow takes these frames out of Riley's personal album of pain, and she makes lapidaries of emotions that can be related to. It is really significant that she does not write poems with some kind of cloying sentimentality. They are rather very, very cryptically written, right? It's not that she's talking about the tears she has shed. She's talking about the pain that has crystallized inside her heart, the pain that she cannot overcome, the pain that has come to be a part of her very existence, and time again is the one most important motive in this particular text. Now, as I always say, when you sit down to hear the video of a poem, you always need to have the text in front of you. So we'll first focus on the title of the poem. It is called Death Makes Dead Metaphor Revive. Now, as it appears, there is already a paradox in the title, because she claims that death is making dead metaphor revive. Death is a word with a lot of finality, right? It is something that cannot be overcome or gone beyond. But here, she claims that death, or the experience of it, is making dead metaphor revive. Two things that we have to understand: Riley's concept of death, and the idea of dead metaphors as propounded by experts, and how she takes it and subverts it in her own particular case. Now, death for her is not the same as most of us understand, right? Even in our faith, it is always said, in a lot of faiths, in fact, in the world, it is said that it is only a transfer from one state of being to another. So when her son, the eldest child that she had, called Jacob, whom she mentions in her writings as Jay, died of a heart disease that was undiagnosed, and it was very sudden, very unfortunate, while he was on holiday. She needless to say, was shocked. And she has written, in letters and, her writings, she keeps on repeating this idea, as a mother, and not only a mother, as an observer of the experience of death. The person in her, the mother in her, is suffering, while the intellectual in her is trying to analyze and philosophize the entire experience. But the beauty of it is that the mother and the intellectual are never very distant or very apart from each other. They work in tandem, and they work together, complementing each other's understanding of the experience. And which is why it took her 4 years, and then she published this collection of poems that really catapulted her into the A grade of poets of our times. Now, she says, dead metaphor is revived by the experience of death. She has written everywhere. I'm sorry, I digressed. My sentence just went winding. She has mentioned everywhere that she does not want to speak of her son as dead. Okay, so she does not mention Jay as dead. She only says that he's away. He's not available physically. He's away. And she refuses to acknowledge or to admit that her child is not going to come back. And in that essay, Time Lived, without its flow. Time Lived Without Its Flow was a collection of diary entries, and later on it was a review of things that she has added later to it. But initially it started with like a week after Jacob's death, and then 5 months later. And there are these paradigms that you find of pain and of acceptance, maybe of some kind, where she is trying to write very, very practically about her experience. She says that when she lost her child, time stopped for her. Okay, it did not have any linear movement, and she has expressed it very beautifully. She says, the child's time is uncoiling within you. So you and the child, the mother and the child are, or the parent and the child are in tandem with each other. They are living a life that they share. They are stakeholders in each other's time. Okay, so when the child is dead, suddenly the mother loses her time. Her significance and time's role in her life is not there anymore. And she tries to analyze, and she tries to practically look at the situation. And she says that, time is ticking, it is oscillating. But, the pendulum goes to fro. She mentions it in this poem, in the first stanza itself. But time does not move. It is stuck in one place and it cannot go beyond. So her concept of death is a kind of a paralysis in time, and she does not want to admit. She says it's almost like I used to feel I'm being disloyal to him when I say that he's dead, because he's not. He lives, he has become the pain that I am. So it's not only feeling pain in a different way, but she cannot really dissociate the feeling of loss and pain from her self anymore. So she is become the pain, and her son, or the memory of him, is something that makes her realize that time is no more relevant to her life. It is moving, but she has frozen somewhere. She is stuck in a kind of a paralysis, in a state of limbo. I'll continue in the next video. We continue with discussing the title of the poem. In his book, The Language of Metaphor, Andrew Goatley mentions that a metaphor, when it is called dead, is something that does not really have an available connection for the reader between the tenor, which is the word, and the vehicle, which is the meaning. He gives the example of the word pupil. Now, initially, whenever the word pupil was said, people who were using this word, writing this word, hearing this word, would understand that pupil here is a metaphor that is used for allowing, that that is used for a student. Now, actually, the word is that little aperture in the eye that allows light to come in. So, you see, it is an extended relation over here. The student is the recipient of light, the teacher is the giver of light, knowledge is light, and then the opening, the more that there is the opening is available, the more knowledge can seep in. So it is a very, very extended and very beautiful and a very poetic idea. But now, if I say pupil, you will only understand a student pursuing studies in a kind of a formalized educational institution. We do not think beyond. So it is a dead metaphor. Now, Riley is saying that death is making dead metaphor revive. So one thing is for sure, that there is this phoenix-like quality about her writing that has gained so much of strength, so as to again get up and start itself. She mentions an engine. It's like the engine trying to shudder with ardent weight in an attempt to restart. I will not say that she overcomes her son's loss in this poem. In fact, she concludes two very very heart-wrenching of her poems in this particular one. She concludes them. There are certain ideas that are here concluded very, very clearly. For instance, there is this writing of hers where the poem is called Listening for Lost People. Okay, like she has an ear out, listening for lost people. She does not say dead people, mind you. People are lost. As I mentioned, that she never regarded her son as dead. She always said that he's away. So, in that poem, Listening for Lost People, the last two lines, and I'll just read that out. The souls of the dead are the spirit of language. The souls of the dead together form the spirit of language. You hear them alight inside that spoken thought. So when the thought is formed in the mind and then articulated in speech or utterance or writing, whenever that happens, you find the dead or their memory or their presence, may I call it, alight, burning, aflame, giving light and giving energy and warmth to the thought itself. So this is very minor recovery, but a recovery nonetheless from her state of that desperate paralysis in which she finds herself after she loses her son. And you hear them alight, they're burning, they're aflame, and they're giving you light and warmth and heat, and generating that sort of energy for the spoken thought to be alive, right? So death makes dead metaphor revive. What does that mean? Yeah, she has taken the strength from her pain, and she has engraved this lapidary of love and loss for you to read, right? So we will get into the poem now. The first line: death makes dead metaphor revive. So we know what a dead metaphor is. A dead metaphor is somewhere where, the snapping of connection. It's like a wire that is broken, a cord that is broken. So that dead metaphor is being revived into a living metaphor by death itself. By death itself. So the experience of death, mind you, it is not Riley's death. It is not her creativity's death. It is not her poem's death. She is talking about experiencing the death of her child. Now, how does that happen? Mind you, her tragedy is always faceted two sides. One is her own loss, as a mother would feel, and the other that she constantly talks about is the loss of the son, who was cut off, whose life was cut short so rudely by destiny. And she is constantly mentioning this, right? So she says that death, or the experience of it, the way she lives after her son is gone, and she's trying to overcome that. So she's constantly trying to analyze, and she's constantly trying to grasp the idea that her son is not there anymore. From this pain, she gets the inspiration to write what she does. And she says death and the experience of it is making the dead metaphor revive. Now, what had happened when her son passed away, her obviously, she was numb with shock, and she took time to even accept that he was not going to come back, because her entry in that essay, or that set of diary entries, 5 months later, she says it's been almost half a year and he still has not returned, almost something to that effect, but he still has not come back. So you see the desperation of the mother longing, the desperation of the mother, so rudely fooled by destiny, almost cheated by destiny, is there. It is there. And she is not able to write just then, but when she is able to, she realizes that it is her son's death that has made her dead metaphors revive on their own. Okay, so the death that she's talking about is a temporary one. The death that she's talking about is the state of paralysis her mind has entered into after the loss of her son, right? So death makes dead metaphor revive. Every time that she's able to internalize that experience of death, it generates a kind of energy for the dead metaphors of her language to be revived, and she's out to express. Now, this poem, as much as it is about her little effort at a recovery, or a little admission or a confession of a recovery, or her wound healing a little bit with time, more than all these things, it is also about the act of creating art. It is also about the act of writing a poem, and she's very, very clear about that. Towards the end, you realize how she has, welded these two things together, which is why I keep using the word lapidary. She has welded the two things together. So the personal pain, and then plus the intellectual's attempt to create something, both of them are beautifully amalgamated in the poem. Death makes dead metaphor revive. Revive to what extent? Turn stiffly bright and strong. It's almost this strange positivity that comes in the second line itself, with the use of the words bright and strong. So she says that the dead metaphor has suddenly become bright and strong. It is ready. It is ready. And then time that is felt as stopped. The stopped is within quotes. Okay, it's obviously the reference to her essay, Time Lived Without Its Flow. So the time that is frozen for her will freeze its to fro song. So the oscillation will freeze. Whether or not the poet will be able to break out of this paralysis, whether or not she'll be able to overcome this state of limbo, is something that we need to see in the poem. As we read, we discover. But for now, it is a very strange state, because the dead metaphor has suddenly become bright and strong, and the frozen time, as I said in the previous video, that the linear movement of time has stopped for her. She's stuck in that frame. It is frozen, is paralyzed, and in that state she cannot really visualize time as moving, her life moving, or time moving, in a flow. So she can just hear the oscillation of the pendulum, the tick-tock that goes on, the to-fro movement of the pendulum that goes on. That is the only way she registers time. And she says the time that is felt as stopped will freeze. So now the song is going to freeze. So something is going to happen. Either the dead metaphor will be so broken now that it will never recover, or it will just make a small start attempt at revival. So we will see now how far the dead metaphor is revived. In the second stanza, she says, I parrot under feldspar rock, sunk into chambered eyes. Language, the spirit of the dead, may mouth each utterance twice. So as soon as time has stopped oscillating the way it was for all these years after her son's death, we find that this is the defining moment in the poem where the dead metaphor is trying to revive itself. And how will it revive, how will it be revived, or how will it gain life again? Because of course, the effort of the poet or the artist herself. And she says, I parrot under feldspar rock. Very important, please understand the two words, parrot and feldspar. uh, in the word parrot, there is the sense of caricature, of repetition, of mundane, inane repetitions that a parrot does. You know, what does a parrot do? It is taught certain words and phrases and it goes on repeating those without probably even understanding. So there is this a constant kind of chanting that the parrot is doing. And then she says, under feldspar rock. Very important, the mention of the word feldspar. Uh, when the volcanic activity results in the throwing out of lava, and when the magma cools down, the mostly the stones that are formed are feldspar rocks, right? So she is already considering herself as cooled magma, or something that is the fossil of life itself. The very mention of feldspar here instantly establishes the idea that at some point of time, the metaphor, which is now dead, or the poet's ability at using metaphor, was live, living, throbbing. It was full of warmth and the heat of life, as if. And now that it has cooled, now that it has been fossilized, covered and smothered with layers of pain, after her loss, she has now realized that she's sunk under feldspar rocks. So there's this smothering of fossilized rocks on her and she cannot break out. Can you imagine how deep she imagines her ability to revive the dead metaphor, how deep buried it appears when she uses this line, I parrot under feldspar rock. So sunk into chambered ice, right? So it's as if she's been preserved in a chamber of ice. Again, that reminds you of a corpse, right? That reminds you of something that is dead. That reminds you of something that needs some kind of preservation because it does not have an ability to preserve itself anymore. That's exactly how we preserve corpses. We preserve them in chambers of ice. And she says that I feel that there's this humongous elephantine weight on me that I cannot break. So what am I doing? I'm still making an effort. I'm parroting. I'm going on chanting. I'm going on repeating certain phrases. I'm going on repeating certain dead metaphors to myself. Language, the spirit of the dead may mouth each utterance twice. Okay, so we already, in the previous video we discussed how she concludes her very, very popular and well-read and much appreciated, much acclaimed poem Listening for Lost People, where she mentions the souls of the dead are the spirit of language. You hear them alight inside that spoken thought. So anybody who thinks that the dead are to be forgotten, well, Riley does not really seem to agree with them, and she says that language, the spirit of the dead. So here the memory of loss, what is it doing? May mouth each utterance twice. That is giving her the energy, that is generating a kind of a chant. So she is parroting, her spirit is parroting something, and then the spirit of the dead is also parroting something. So eventually they'll be able to mouth each utterance twice. They will repeat each utterance twice, and then there will be a chant, a kind of a rhythm, a kind of a tandem that will be brought about, will be achieved, and that is probably what is going to break this ice. She wants to reach out and reach beyond this chamber of ice. Please remember that as of now her status is of that of a corpse, which is not exactly dead. Is just in that state of inaction, or that state of limbo, or that state of paralysis. Okay, and she says Spirit as echo clowns around in punning repartee. Again, a very, very freighted, weighty line where she says that spirit as echo clowns around. Okay, it seems that language is making fun of my effort. Clowns around. It is. How is that doing that in punning repartee? Everything that I say. What is a pun? Right, a word that has got two meanings. One is the obvious one, and the other is the not so obvious one. And usually, the not so obvious one is. What should I say, is something that you cannot really mention directly in language, maybe a kind of a joke, maybe a kind of, an indecent remark. So, she is saying that language is almost caricaturing my effort at reviving the dead metaphor, but there is also this, sense of. What do I call it? Affectionate friendship. Maybe that's too strong a phrase. There's this sense of knowing. Language knows the poet, much like the poet knows the language. And there is this punning repartee that is taking place between the two. So they have their own comfort level, it seems. Right, and when language is clowning around, repeating every word, there is this punning repartee is making fun and changing the meaning of everything that she wants to say, or changing the meaning of every utterance. So whenever the dead metaphor is trying to revive itself, or when the poet is trying to revive the dead metaphor, language, which is the spirit of the dead, is making fun of her. Please remember, please try and understand. It may sound confusing to you right now, but this poem deals with 3-4 parallelly running ideas right from the beginning till the end. Okay, one is the idea of a corpse being revived. The second is the idea of a river which is covered with ice being thawed, okay, into water. Then you have the idea of language waking up inside a person. Then you have the idea of the basis of any creativity, the very start of any creativity, the act of creating a work of art. All these things are running parallel, and then of course eventually she concludes with how there is this constant tussle between the intellect and the instinct, between the Apollonian and the Dionysiac. And I will explain all that. Don't have to swoon right now. I will explain all that, but please pay attention. Okay, you have to understand the poem, of course, at the literal level first. So, spirit as echo clowns around, okay, like a joker in punning repartee, repeating everything and changing the meaning of everything that is being said. Since each word overhears itself, laid bare clairaudently. Every word is now, hearing itself. It's like the corpses are coming back to life. The state of paralysis, the state of coma is being overcome, and every word is able to hear itself, being repeated, of course, by language again, or by the spirit that is clowning around. And the word clairaudently is what you need to focus on. And I'll end the video over here. Clairaudiently is okay. You need to understand clairvoyance first. What is clairvoyance? Now, when people claim, like prophets would, and of course they did, possess an ability to perceive what is not generally perceptible to people. When you claim that you have clairvoyance, what do you mean? That I have an ability to perceive things that are beyond the normal realm, that are supernatural or suprasensory, that other people cannot perceive with their senses, but I can. So clairaudiently is the oral or the hearing ability related faculty of clairvoyance. Okay, clairaudiently means that each word is suddenly back into life, suddenly back to life, and is able to hear itself being repeated clairaudiently. Now this repetition is not available to people in general, is not available to other things that may surround the artist or the poet or Riley herself, right, but is available to the words. It's a special kind of ability to perceive. It's a special perception faculty that the words have now achieved. Right, in the next stanza, She starts with an Orphic engine revs but floods, choked on its ardent weight. Uh, the word Orphic comes from the name Orpheus, and the myth is that Orpheus was this legendary musician who was so extremely gifted that he could draw stones and trees and elements of nature and animals and supernatural beings and men and women alike with the power of his song. He could melt stones. He had so much of charm in his music. He had so much of extraordinariness in his music that at one point of time in the legend, he's able to even move the god of the underworld, Hades, in order to go and have a look at how his wife is doing after she's dead and she has moved to the underworld. So that's how the legend is. But whenever we mention Orpheus, we talk about tremendous creative ability. We talk about the song being such that it cannot be ignored. We talk about the song being so extraordinary that it has the power to move mountains, literally. And whenever artists are talking about Orpheus, there is this unspoken intention of creating something that can move the world, of a song or a work of art or a painting or a sculpture or all of it combined, or maybe just a thought that is spoken and shared. So she says that, my being at this point of time is like an Orphic engine. It has the same kind of tremendous creative ability as Orpheus did. But then she again juxtaposes this word Orphic alongside the word engine. So on the one hand, you have the legendary musician belonging to the Greco-Roman traditions of mythology and folklore and legend and whatnot. I mean, all sorts of ideas, art. Everywhere we find the mention of Orpheus, but she juxtaposes that grand artistic idea against something as technical, mundane, modern, and ordinary as the word engine. And she says that, my being is like an Orphic engine, so it has tremendous capacity to create. There's tremendous creative ability, and yet when it revs up, when it is ready, you've seen it, you can almost imagine that the key is being pushed in and it's been turned to start the engine, but that is not happening because the engine is shuddering with the effort of trying to start. So there is something wrong, but the engine is not completely dead and it is not able to move the vehicle. So she says that, my being or my effort or my creative ability right now is like an Orphic engine. There is tremendous capacity, and yet it is revving up. When it is getting ready, it is shuddering with the whole experience of it. And then what happens? It floods. So there's some kind of a concussion, an explosion, and it floods. How does it flood? Choked on its ardent weight. It is choking on its ardent weight. Ardent, eager, wait. It is so keen to restart that it chokes on the effort of it. It is not able to achieve the restart immediately, but it has made some kind of effort. How do we know that? Disjointed anthems dip and bob. Downtime's defrosted spate. So after the Orphic engine has made one last desperate attempt at a tumult, at achieving some kind of a revving up or a readying or a restarting, that disjointed anthems are produced. So dead metaphor is revived to some extent because now you have uneven rhymes being produced, you have disjointed anthems being produced. Dip and bob. What is happening now? As I told you, that there is this constant parallel running idea that there's the sea, which is frozen on the surface, and there is water which is underneath, and then there's land that is also covered with ice. So somewhere between all this, is the creativity of the poet. And with this Orphic engine revving up and shuddering and choking on its ardent weight, the ice is broken. So out of the chamber of ice, there is one thaw that has taken place. And what has happened? Now the water has started melting. The water has started melting, and you see the detritus or the debris floating on the surface of the water is, how these chunks of land and earth and or maybe just ice that are floating on the surface of the thawing river or the thawed river or the melting river, they appear dipping and bobbing. So they actually dip and then they resurface. Again, they dip and they resurface. So they're not completely drowned, and they're neither completely afloat. They're in the state of, trying to come back to life. And disjointed anthems. So the anthems are not exactly as neat and as connected as they should be. The verses are uneven, so they dip and bob. Some are rejected, some are retained, some are forgotten, some are remembered. So disjointed anthems dip and bob down time's defrosted spate. Okay, again, it seems like time was frozen, like a frozen sea, like a sea of ice. And then what has happened, because of that ardent Orphic engine that has revved itself once and maybe lost a lot in that shuddering that it has experienced, what has happened is that there is a thaw that has taken place, and disjointed anthems have now been produced, and they're all floating down time's defrosted spade. What does that mean? That the river that is thawing and flowing now, that is melting and flowing now, is the defrosted spate or the span or the occurrence of time. So finally there is a little bit of recovery from her essay, A Time Lived Without Its Flow, because in this poem she is showing how time has regained its flow again. So there is some kind of movement that has taken place, and the defrosted spate, the time span has now become defrosted. The ice has now been broken, thawed. Very little of it. Large chunks still remain untouched, and yet there is some kind of a recovery. There is some kind of an effort on her part that she has been able to thaw something of the chamber of ice and come a little bit out of it to express herself and articulate. And that is the only way to recover from the state that she is in. She knows that, and therefore she is trying. Right, the final stanza. Over its pools of greeny melt, the rearing ice will tilt. To make rhyme chime again with time, I sound a curious lilt. Now, when I'm trying to explain this particular stanza, I will start from the last line first. You have to understand what is a curious lilt. A lilt is a rhythm or a song. Here, of course, the reference to the poem that she's writing, and it's called a curious one. Now, the curious is not, the word curious is not used in the same sense as we know it. It is used in the sense of the word eager or extremely interested. Curious is, now we mostly use it in a very negative connotation. We call people who are very nosy or very inquisitive, very curious. But she has used it in the sense of its etymological base, coming from the Latin word cura. Here, eagerness is there in the song that she's trying to write. Curious, it's an eager lilt, it's an eager rhythm, it's an eager song. It's a song that is already very, very intent on its own creation. You remember the Orphic engine? So a song that is extremely intent on its own creation. So this is the curious lilt, and what is she doing? She's trying to Rhyme chime with time. Rhyme is italicized, mind you, poetry, and she's trying to make that chime with time or match with time. So you see, it's like she has affected a compromise between her loss and the rest of her life. She has affected a compromise between that state of emotional and intellectual paralysis, that numbness, that shock that she was in, and the fact that time has not stopped for her. Time has not stopped for her. She has not admitted this to herself for a long time, but then time has continued its linear movement. So she's now trying to probably visualize time as it used to be once, before she found destiny obliterating her first statement of motherhood. So when she lost her child, that is. So to make rhyme with time, as if the most important thing to do is to ensure that her poems have got that artistic and ethical commitment to the state of mind that she is in, the state of mind or the state of being in which time is finding her. She wants to be completely morally and artistically committed to that state of being. And over its pools of greeny melt, the rearing ice will tilt, as if ice is frowning, as if the pain that she had let, and she had allowed to smother her intellectual ability, the pain that was allowed by her, the time that was frozen, everything that stopped is being represented by the word ice here. And ice is as if looking disapprovingly at the thawing river or the melting river that is trying to move with the flow of time, or it's moving with the effort that it has generated. Okay, and what is the factor that the frozen sea has suddenly started turning into a melting river? What is the reason behind it, that the ice is now thawing and melting? Because the choked engine has revved up and has flooded. So there is one effort on the part of the poet herself, and therefore she is now moving a little bit forward with the linear flow of time. And she says, over its pools of greeny melt, you understand, chunks of earth, grass covered, the detritus floating on the surface of a melting sea, or a melting water body where the water is flowing, so it carries a lot of stuff of itself, right? So over its pools of greeny melt. You remember disjointed anthems, and pools is also something like that. So there is no continuum. There are certain non-fluent pools of creativity or fluent articulations that are there. So dead metaphor has not suddenly become a very, very healthily living metaphor, if I may say so, but it is still on its way to a sort of a recovery. And she says, over its pools of greeny melt, the rearing ice will tilt, as if looking disapprovingly, tilting and looking at the greeny melt. But the greeny melt is slowly, very quietly, very silently breaking away from that source of pain, but carrying a memory of the same. Please remember that eventually the water that is now melting is not anything but the pain that was crystallized and frozen as ice. So her poems, if they come out now, her poems now, if they have a universal appeal, her poems now, if they are read by everybody, and people who have unfortunately suffered similar losses, if they find any kind of solace in her works, then one thing is for sure, that the crystallization of that pain has now been turned into a fluid expression and articulation, a river of emotions that is now shimmering, coming to life for other people, to gain solace from and to learn from and to gain strength from. So this is what she's doing, right? So just a few more things. I may actually give you this in writing, but this is more or less, this is how the text is covered. And from peculiar personal metaphors, she returns to the metaphor of the river. The time is always taken from nursery rhymes, gently down the stream, merrily, 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 life is but a dream. So you know how it is, right? So the metaphor of time as a river flowing is a very traditional and a very accepted one generally. But she seemed to have been sunk under feldspar rock into some chamber of ice, and this choked, ardent engine that has revved and flooded on its own weight has actually generated an ability for her dead metaphors to come back to life, for her to find some kind of articulation. The language, which is the spirit of the dead, has given her the power to communicate, right? So she is right now attempting maybe a very minor but then a very, very important recovery. We may continue in another discussion on the same text, but before that I want you to sit with the text and watch the videos, so that, and of course hear them with some kind of an aid, because I really cannot guarantee too good a quality of sound, but I've tried. So please do go through all the videos with the text in your hand, and you will have plenty of doubts, so be nice and let me know about those. We will clear that. All right, take care. Thank you.